Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I am an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description below where you will find links to anything I talk about on this video, including where you can buy my patterns to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, and how to support me on Patreon. As I have mentioned in the last video, I have been looking through the questions that y'all have sent me using the MailChimp form and working with that to come up with ideas about what I can talk about. And one of the things that there seems to be quite a few questions about is my design process and designing in general and things like that. And I'm not going to answer any of those questions right now, but know that they are on the list. What I decided to talk about today was kind of a riff off of those, and it's a design thing that you probably don't even know to ask about. So I thought it would be fun to give this little kind of behind the scene peek at a certain element of how this knitting industry works. And for those of you who may be aspiring designers, this might help you a little bit in an arena that maybe you've been struggling with or thinking about. And what I'm going to talk about is how to write a proposal for submitting a knitting design for consideration. Now, there's two different things I'm going to kind of talk about. And the first one will be proposing to a magazine or a book or someone who is soliciting designers to do like a collection or yarn companies. There are people who do this, and what it is responding to a call for submissions, because that's what it's called. And then the second thing I'll talk about is how to write a proposal as an independent designer, writing to a yarn company asking for what is called yarn support. Okay, so those are two things. And first, as I said, we're going to talk about submitting to a call for submissions. And that is the thing. It's a call for submissions. So knitting magazines, knitting books, larger yarn companies who create their own collections send out what are called calls for submissions. And it is inviting knitwear designers to submit their ideas for whatever collection or magazine or book that the parent company or whomever it is, the publisher, the yarn company, is planning on producing. Now, I will try to put a few links in the description below, but the first thing is where to find these calls for submissions. So if you're interested in submitting to a magazine, you want to go to that magazine's website and dig through it, and you will find a way to get on their mailing list. It'll be their call for submissions mailing list. And you simply, usually there'll be an email address, and you simply email that person and say, hello, I am a knitwear designer. Please put me on your list so that I can receive your next submission call. There are online, one of the biggest ones, Knitty, has all of the process spelled out on their website. I'll link to that. And so those are magazines. Yarn companies, you can sometimes find out the information and write to them and ask to be on their call for submissions list, or they are frequently posted in a group on Ravelry called the Designers Group, and I will post a link to that. So the first step is, getting the submission call. And what these submission calls usually entail is it'll be a description of the collection or collections that they are creating. If it's a yarn company, they'll frequently tell you what yarn bases they want you design with, like companies like Brooklyn Tweed or Knit Picks or something like that will tell you this collection is for this yarn. And then there are usually stories or themes that they're wanting you to build around. And there is most usually what's called a mood board. And what this mood board is a series of images that may or may not have any knitting in them. It could just be pictures of like trees and glaciers and people sitting around a fire or something. These mood boards are to set the mood for your design. So there'll be a written description of what the theme or the story they're going for is. And then there'll be a mood board, as I said, which may or may not have any, like, it's not gonna be like, hey, here's a person in a sweater. It's gonna be sort of abstract. They will usually let you know if that mood board is intended to reflect the color palette that they're working with, etc., etc. So you use this call for inspiration for your designs that you are going to submit. And the number one piece of advice I can give you is the way you submit is to follow their instructions. Read it carefully and see what they're asking for, because every different call has different what they want. There are magazines that will have online forms that you have to fill out a form. It used to be that Interweave did not accept any digital submissions, and you had to print out forms, fill them out, send in a physical presentation with your swatch. Look at it and see what their guidelines for submitting are and follow those to a T. Okay? If they say, we want 1-page PDFs, make a 1-page PDF. Don't be like, oh, I have more to say, so I'm going to go with 2. They're telling you what they want. Give it to them. Okay? And I cannot emphasize enough, be careful, because what you are proposing to them is writing a pattern. And how you write your proposal, they're going to look at it, and if it has misspellings, if it has punctuation errors, if it is missing a major element that they requested, then that is going to be a mark against you, because they're going to look at these proposals as a representation of your attention to detail and how you will eventually be writing that pattern and following their style guide. So just look at what they want and give it to them is what I would say. Now, they're going to ask for swatches. They will usually say if the swatch has to be, like if it's a yarn company, they'll usually say if the swatch has to be in their yarn or if it can just be a representative yarn. Typically, they're okay with a representative yarn, but what you need to do is whatever you're knitting your swatch in needs to be similar or reflect what you visualize for the pattern. So if you're thinking about doing a beautiful silk lacy shawl, don't knit the swatch in woolly wool, okay? Because that's not going to show them anything. And that is another thing, swatches. They want to see big swatches. They don't want a little thing like this. They want a big swatch. We're talking 4x4, 6x6, something that is going to show them what you are proposing. And what the swatch is to show them the fabric that you are creating, and it should contain any really significant details. Now, do you need to submit a stockinette swatch? No. But you might want to do a stockinette swatch if it has creative shoulder shaping or a raglan detail, showing them the interesting details of what you're going to do. If you're doing a cable pattern, if you're doing a lace pattern, you need to have a swatch that shows them enough of the repeat, and it may be more than one repeat, so that they have a good idea of what you're proposing. And typically, they're going to ask for swatches and a sketch. I can't draw. I can't draw particularly well, so that is a struggle for me. But what you want to do is try to sketch out what the piece you're proposing is going to mostly look like. They're not expecting you to be Michelangelo, but you have to try. I will put a link in the description, or at least put the word. Something you want to look for is something called a croquis. C-R-O-Q-U-I. And a croquis is think about it, paper dolls, where you cut out the paper doll and then you cut out the clothing and you can put them on. The croquis is the doll. It is a line art drawing of a person in fashion style positions that you can then trace and draw whatever it is you want on it. So croquis can be very helpful if you're not the best at sketching. If you're proposing like a rectangular shawl, I've done line drawings in Illustrator where it's just like, it's this long, it angled like this, and then I draw the details in. So a mishmash of using computer generated and hand-drawn stuff is fine. It just needs to be clear and neat and communicate what you need to communicate and what they're asking for. Things they're going to ask for are things like, why is this yarn for this particular pattern? You need to explain why you selected the yarn, because let me tell you, if you're proposing to a magazine or a book, the odds of them using the yarn you swatch in and you are mentioning, very, very low. Here's a little tip and a little secret. If you are proposing to a magazine, it might behoove you to go and look at some back issues of magazines and look at who advertises in those magazines. And maybe considering using one of those yarns for your proposal. I'm just saying. You know that they advertise in that magazine, so it is a yarn that probably might show up in that magazine. But be prepared that they're not going to, more likely than not, they're not going to use the yarn you proposed. It's just, unless the story is specifically about the yarn, because there have been stories that I've seen calls for where they're specifically asking for recycled yarn or something like that. So if you find something, but have a description of the yarn, why you chose it, and maybe suggest a couple substitutes, or just explain what attributes of that yarn are important to your design. So if you're making something that really relies on well-defined stitch definition, you need to say this needs a yarn with well-defined stitch definition so that it will, or this needs to be aggressively blocked, it needs a natural fiber to hold that block. Give them information. Let them know you thought about those kinds of things. But all of them are going to ask for it. Do not forget. You want your name, your contact information on every single page you send to them. Okay? Don't forget that. Needs to be your name, email address. If they ask for your phone number or your mailing address, put it on there. They will probably ask for your mailing address because they're going to need to mail you yarn. So have that. If you're allowed to have more than one page, have it on every single page. So if things get shuffled, that they can still find you. So you're going to have your PDF. You're going to have photographs of your swatch, have them well lit, have them look nice, and just put it together and make it look nice and have attention to detail. Does that make sense? Okay, I realize that I shifted my voice, my point of view, and I'm definitely talking to someone who's trying to submit. But I really hope those of y'all who are just looking for behind the scenes understand that I'm talking to the imaginary person and also you, so that you know how this works. Now, you will see, or people will see, the call for submission. Usually you get 2-3 weeks to come up with your proposal and get it in. And then usually they think about it for 6-7 weeks. And then once you discuss how much you're going to get paid and everything, you usually have, from the time you get your yarn to the time you have to deliver, around 6 weeks. So that's your time frame. In that 6 weeks, you have to swatch with the yarn, write your pattern, knit the pattern, and do everything and deliver the written pattern and the finished piece on time to them. Blocked, ends woven in. All of those kinds of things. So when you're planning the whole thing, look at the submission call and make sure that 6 weeks where you're going to have to be doing all that work doesn't overlap with some other commitment or your vacation or something that's going to cause a problem. So, okay, I think that's it. It is. It's a little complicated, and it is different if you're submitting to a collection being planned by a yarn company. Like I've had several with Manos del Uruguay. Oh, no, there's something. Now, I don't know if you've ever, done a resume kind of situation. When you are sending it in, make sure to be professional in the email that everything is attached to. Take a moment to introduce yourself. Tell them you like their yarn. Tell them if you're flexible in the pattern. Say, I've proposed this triangular shawl, but it would also work as a rectangular shawl, or I could see it as a this or a that. Tell them that you're flexible if you're flexible, because they might be able to fill a hole with something they need in their collection. So there's that. Okay. Now, this video is getting long. It's a lot of information. The other side is proposing yarn support. Now, what yarn support is, and this is a behind the scenes, is it can get really expensive as a designer to be sourcing all of this yarn, especially if you're knitting garments and things like that. So often what you do is you reach out to a yarn company that you like, or that has a product you like, or whatever, and you collaborate with them. And in this, your email is very important. So if you're going to be emailing a yarn company and asking them to provide you with yarn support, you need to let them know what you're bringing to the table. You need to introduce yourself. You need to provide links to your social media outlets. Say, I'm this person. I am insert name here, and I have designed X number of independent patterns. Here is a link to my portfolio page on Ravelry or my website. You can see the other things I've done. I am active on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. Here are links to my social media outlets where you can see my activity. You can see that I will be promoting your product, and also explain why you like their product and why you think it's a good fit for what you are proposing. And then have made a PDF that is a formal proposal. Don't just write and say, hey, I'm going to make a sweater. Can you give me yarn? Because the answer is going to be no. Send them, show them that you're a professional and that you have as much to bring to this party as they are, that it will be beneficial for them to have their yarn in your pattern. Make sure you have good photography. Send them links so that they can see what your photography looks like, etc., etc. Make a PDF proposal, and in that proposal have, just like you're proposing to a magazine, have a sketch. Have swatches that you have photographed. In this context, it might behoove you to use their yarn, but if not, explain to them, I think I used this because I had it. It's similar to your yarn of YZ. Explain why, I think I said this already, but for a yarn company, it's really important. Explain why their yarn is a good fit for what you're proposing. Tell them your time frame. Say, my intention is for this to be part of a shawl collection I am releasing on X date. Give them an understanding of the expectation of when they can expect this pattern to be released. Tell them who your tech editor is, who your photographer is. Give them the information that they can see that you're a professional and that you have attention to detail. Again, punctuation, capitalization. Don't misspell their name or the name of their yarn company. Because let me tell you, spell check does not like the name of a lot of yarn companies. Your attention to detail in the proposal is going to reflect on how they think your pattern writing is going to be. you may or may not want to go ahead, especially if you've already designed something in their yarn, go ahead and send them an example PDF of what one of your patterns looks like so that they know it is presented professionally. And lastly, ask for a reasonable amount of yarn. Okay? If it is your first time dealing with this yarn company, don't say, hi, you've never met me before. I want you to send me 40 skeins so I can knit this giant Afghan, because that is not a good way to start your relationship. You don't necessarily want to say, I'm making a 6 shawl collection. Send me enough yarn for all 6 shawls. That's not an opening gambit. You need to build relationships with these yarn companies. And then maybe you can work your way towards larger collaborations. But that is what these are. That is what yarn support is. It is a collaboration. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement where independent designers get the yarn and then you cross promote once the pattern is finished. You publish the pattern and you recommend their yarn. And then after you've finished it, go back and when you're launching, contact the person you got the yarn from and tell them, this is the launch date. Here are images that you can use on your social media. Here are links to where the pattern is going to be live. Communicate with them so that they can also promote the pattern using their yarn. It's a win-win situation. And this video is getting very long. Tails into something that I think might answer some questions, at least one very specific question that knitters, if you're not familiar with this process at all, you might have had, is when a pattern, especially in a book or a magazine, calls for 2 or 3 skeins of a specific kind of yarn, and they don't give you yardage information and things like that, it's because that yarn company has supplied that yarn and they want you to buy 3 skeins of that yarn to make that project. When additional information is provided, which yes, makes it easier to substitute, makes it less likely that you're going to use that yarn. So in books and published things like that, sometimes you're not going to see yardage information, skein weight kind of things like that. But you can always do the math. If it says 3 skeins of this yarn, you can always go look up that yarn, figure out how much the yardage is. But this again, with independent designers, if a yarn company has provided yarn support, suggesting alternative yarns in the pattern itself, or on the pattern page listing on Ravelry or Lovecrafts or whatever site, that can be seen as breaking that collaboration. That can be seen as you maybe not getting yarn support again because you're not holding up your end of the bargain. So while you might be able to contact a designer directly and they'll be happy to help you come up with yarn substitutions, putting that information on the pattern page itself or on the pattern itself is kind of a no-no. And it's just the way that things work in the knitting industry. So this was a quick overview. If you weren't aware of this process at all, hopefully you found it a little bit interesting to learn about submission calls and mood boards and all of those kinds of fun things. If you're a designer, if you take nothing away from this, please take away that formatting, punctuation, proper grammar, those kind of things, paying attention to what they're asking for, all of that matters. You can have the most brilliant, beautiful sketch and idea, but if you don't supply your contact information, they're not going to get back to you. So it's just pay attention, because especially the third party, the publishers and things, they're not just looking for good designs, because there are a lot of amazing designers out there with good designs. They're looking for good designs and good pattern writing and someone they know that they can work with. And if your proposal is a hot mess, then they're going to assume that you're a hot mess, and they might pass you over for another idea that was comparable to yours. And that's another thing. I have very, very few patterns in magazines because my creative process takes longer than 3 weeks. I normally, from the time I see a mood board, I can't get the idea worked out in time to submit. It just, that's not the way my brain works. So usually I see a design, like a submission call, and I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. And I start thinking about it. And like 2 months later, I've figured something out, and then it's just too late. So more what I know about submissions comes from the work I've done with yarn companies on the other side, looking at and evaluating proposals. So, well, one yarn company. I worked for one yarn company. I can obviously talk about this for a lot longer. I'm realizing that I'm looking at like my timestamp. This has gone on a long time. It's really an exciting and interesting area of knitwear design that I don't think is talked about a whole lot. So if this has brought up any questions in your mind, please feel free to use the link in the description below to send me questions that I can answer in video, or make comments in the comments, ask about other elements. It's just, love chatting with y'all in the comments, and I'm really excited about the community that we've built here in the comments. I see a lot of the same faces and a lot of the same people, and everybody brings something interesting to the table. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, click that like button. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.